Students, in our last video lecture, we were talking about Kubla Khan, a poem written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This poem Coleridge wrote while he was induced by opium into sleep. And this poem was written in a dream vision, which means that this poem is based on his vision, on the images which Coleridge saw in his dream. And this poem is fragmentary in nature in that this poem was not completed by Coleridge. So that is why it is subtitled as "Or a Vision in a Dream, a Fragment." Now let me revise some lines which we were reading so that you can connect it to the next lines which we are going to read. And from this chasm with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half intermitted burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail, and mid these dancing rocks at once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion. The poet here says that he talks about the powerful spring of water which was, the poet says that which gushes forth from this gorge at momentary intervals and which makes an incessant roaring sound. And the powerful outbursts of water are throwing up huge fragments of rock, pebbles and stones that are falling on the earth, which are falling on the earth, and they are rebounding like hailstones, striking the earth and flying off, or like grains leaping up from the earth when beaten with a flail by a farmer trying to separate them from chaff. Now, then the poet says, through wood and dale the sacred river ran. Through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kubla heard from far ancestral voices professing war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. The poet says that the sacred river Alf followed a 5-mile-long winding course through woods and valleys, and then it entered the immeasurably deep caves and finally sank in the Dead Sea, producing a loud noise. And in the midst of this noise, Kubla heard the voices of his ancestors prophesying future wars. A prophecy that there might be wars, that there may be wars in future which Kubla will have to fight. The pleasure palace was built somewhere midway between mighty spring and the caves measureless to man. From the palace could be heard the mixed sounds of the water gushing forth from the spring and the water noisily flowing through the caves. The pleasure palace was a specimen of amazing architectural skill. It had sunny domes but icy cold underground vaults. So the poet here imagines a wonderful architecture which was ordered to be built by Kubla Khan. And here Samuel Taylor Coleridge instills all his romantic imagination into this poem, and how beautifully some oriental images he has depicted in this poem. This is to be noted. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight it would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, "Beware, beware!" His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. The poet here says that he imagines that in a strange vision, at one time he saw an Abyssinian maid playing on her dulcimer, a musical instrument, and singing a sweet song about Mount Abora. And the poet says that if he could recapture the sweet melody of the Abyssinian maid, it would fill him with such a divine inspiration that he would write powerfully poetry to give a vivid description of Kubla Khan's pleasure palace, and all those who heard him would be able to see that palace in the air in their imagination. So the poet here strives to complete the poem. He wants to complete the poem, but he feels that he is at loss of words, that he is not able to continue. So he seeks here an inspiration from another imaginary picture which he himself creates in these poetic lines. They would then think of the poet as a mighty magician. They would see his floating hair and his flashing eyes, and would be filled with great awe and fear. They would go around him thrice to protect themselves from this magical powers, and his poetic frenzy would make them think that he was a superhuman being fed on the honeydew and the milk of paradise, and they would warn one another to keep away from him. So this is how the poet gives a closure to this poem and seeks more inspiration from his own imaginary pieces, from his own imaginary pictures, to inspire him more and more to write powerful poetry. So this is how this poem has been brought to an end by Coleridge, and of course it remains a fragment which could not be completed, unfortunately. So this is the poem Kubla Khan, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening.